Dr. William J. Cole is a Greek scholar, author, screenwriter, playwright, a former professor, and he's got a whole bunch of other titles. But for today, we want to focus on the fact that he is an amazing and accomplished author. He has spoken in some of the most amazing places all around the globe. He's spoken in Russia, in South Africa, where I am. That doesn't happen very often. Also staying in Africa, he's spoken in Rwanda, in India, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Canada, and of course, all over the United States. He has authored 8 nonfiction books and 1 novel. He also lectures on the brain at medical schools and at medical conferences. Very, very interesting. And maybe we'll try and squeeze in a question about that. You're watching the Writer's Corner live show. Don't go away. We will be right back. If you're just joining us, you are watching the Writer's Corner live show, and a hearty warm welcome to you. If you are currently not following us, either over on Amazon Live, we are also on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and also over on LinkedIn. So a very warm welcome wherever you're watching us. This show is brought to you compliments of StreamYard, Creative Edge, and BeLive Media. So a special warm welcome. Do join us. Don't be shy. Say hi if you're watching us live. If you're watching us on the replay, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from our audience. Now, before we start every show, we like to remind people that there are tiny little ways in which you can level up when you appear on screen. And one of those things is to use an external camera, because the microphones are the camera that you're using on your laptop, except the newer ones, they are fantastic. But if you've got an older one, try and invest in an external camera. But our number one tip for you to be great on camera is to invest in an external microphone. And they're a dime a dozen. They're cheap. Grab one on Amazon. They're not very expensive, but a simple little lapel microphone will go a long way to you sounding fantastic. On to our show. My amazing co-host and friend is Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She is a special needs and disabilities advocate, and just by way of remembering where we are in the stream of time, we were just recently celebrating autism awareness. So just a shout out to all the families and also especially the moms out there. Mary's also a podcaster, ghostwriter, and an award-winning author herself. So with that, Mary, how are you today?
I am wonderful. And yes, what a great thing to celebrate World Autism Awareness. We had a great celebration yesterday at my son's school, and the latest statistics are 1 in every 36 child, mostly male, more male than female, but by the age of 8 is diagnosed with autism. Isn't that incredible?
It is absolutely incredible. And guys, you must please excuse me. I have had bronchitis for 2 months. And right now I'm trying to fight the urge to cough.
I know. Yes. Yes.
I've got a huge mug of coffee going here to try and help me power through the show. And I know, Mary, you're going to help me out if I get stuck and
Absolutely.
Go into it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to have a great show. We're so excited. And we've got a great author on today, and all 3 of us are authors, but this gentleman has a whole lot more experience than we do. So he's a great person to learn from, isn't he?
He absolutely is. So if you've never ever met Dr. William Cole yet, He is a Greek scholar, an author, a screenwriter, playwright, and he has spoken in numerous places around the world. And he's authored 8 nonfiction books and 1 novel. We're going to be talking about that novel today. And he also tells he loves playing tennis and walking on the mountains. So let's give him a hearty, warm welcome. Shall we do that?
Bring him on. Hi.
Hey, Bridgette. Hey, Mary Elizabeth. Now, I've spoken all over the world, as you just said, but I've never gotten a welcome like that. That was
that is awesome to hear, and I hope you feel welcomed on our show today, because you certainly are.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so excited to have you here.
Glad to be here with you.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to jump off. I'm going to start with a weird question. I don't know, you've probably done a gazillion interviews, and I don't know if anyone's asked you this. So my weird question to you is, what is the weirdest writing habit that you have?
The weirdest writing habit. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I have very many weird writing habits, although I will say sometimes I write poetry while I'm hiking in the mountains. And I wrote a poetry about retirement, which I am now, when I was hiking up one of the trails in the Smoky Mountains. And the problem is I didn't have a pen or paper, so I would recite it to myself and keep reciting it. And eventually I would dictate it into my iPhone and send it to myself as an email. So that's a weird thing, I guess. Yeah.
Oh,
well, it's brilliant too. It's brilliant too, actually. I love that. And I do that too, though. I always have a notebook, with me, or I use my phone to record in, because you never know when those inspirations are going to come. And they always come at I want to say inconvenient times, but maybe times we don't plan on, like 3:00 in the morning when you're trying to sleep, and those thoughts just come and they want to be out on paper somewhere. So as an experienced author, how do you approach the process? We're getting a little more serious here. Developing your characters and their arc throughout your stories.
That's a great question, Mary Elizabeth, and all writers have to deal with that. It is important to have a couple of main characters who have real serious wants. This is true in screenwriting and in playwriting and in novel writing. Your main character's got to have something that he or she wants. And then, of course, you create obstacles that keep the character from getting those things. And that creates the conflict and the excitement in the story. But I have actually found that it's important that all the characters have wants, even the subordinate characters, because if they do, then the story is much fuller and multiplicity of interest is created by having characters that everybody cares about, even one that only appears every once in a while. So then, of course, you're working on your plot and your outline, and some people just write. And I find it's better to kind of know where you're going, a general idea of where you're going, and then you write to that. That's kind of the way I work.
Well, I think those are just excellent tips for anyone watching, for any aspiring authors out there who want to know about the writing process of a really, really accomplished author. How do you balance incorporating real world issues into your writing and still manage to maintain a compelling storyline?
Well, there's so much going on in the world. It's easy to write about whatever's going on, even in a fictional approach. and make it interesting. It almost writes itself. I traveled to several foreign countries to do the research for this novel. James Michener is kind of one of my models for that. He always did a lot of research. Anybody who does a PhD, like the one I have, you have to do lots of research because you become the authority on whatever that subject is. So when I was writing about scenes in Rome or in St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Mount Sinai, I had to travel to those places, which was really kind of fun, actually. And, I would then create the story out of what I would see myself. I also interviewed some real live assassins because my main character is a former CIA hitman who becomes a minister in the South, then gets pulled back to his old world of espionage and murder. And so I wanted to understand how these guys think. And so I interviewed 3 Americans, 1 Israeli and 1 Russian. The Russian was a former mafia chief. And this helped bring the story to life, make it more real. I also have traveled to Israel, and there are scenes in Jerusalem dealing with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I just wanted to understand all of that to be able to write about it. That's kind of a long answer. You ask a professor what time it is, and the professor answers with how to make a watch. So I've got a watch about too long an answer here.
I love it. That's so funny. Yes, and that does happen. And you answered one of our questions, and that was about the most unusual research that you've ever done. I love your story about, interviewing 5 real world assassins or real life assassins, because it seems kind of frightening. But do you have anything that you would consider unusual research that you've done for your book, for this book or any other book?
One of the resources I used is Buck Revell, who was in the FBI, head of counterterrorism, and he is Tom Clancy and Frederick Forsyth's main consultant on counterterrorism and the CIA. He's a friend of mine in Dallas running a big cybersecurity company there. And I took a lot of notes from him so that I knew how to describe the CIA parts of the story, to bring the counterterrorism part to life. I want to mention one other thing, and that is back to the characters. Often in books like this, international espionage books, you'll have the good guys and the bad guys, and often the Americans are the good guys and the Arabs are the bad guys, and that's that. But my story, Assassin's Manuscript, is much more nuanced. One of the great theologians said that there is good in every evil person and evil in every good one. And that's the way this story comes to light in Assassin's Manuscript. All the characters are broken and flawed. Even my main character, whom you think is the main good guy, yes, he is, but there is a brokenness to him. A wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death, to quote the scripture. And so there's no, well, these are the good guys and those are the bad guys. You watch for how flawed everybody is as you read through it. Makes it a more real story for today, I think. And so
were all your characters, just a sort of bonus question to doing these interviews, were they all in the States, or did you actually have to do some traveling? Were they all in person?
Oh, these interviews I did with the hitman, the real life hitman, were all somewhere else. So there were 3 Americans, and I should say one of the Americans was the son of an assassin. And I was lecturing at a college. I'm not going to say the name of it, but this philosophy professor came up afterwards when I had told him I was working on a novel about a former assassin. And he said, let's go have a cup of coffee. And I said, okay. And we went, and he said, I need to tell you, my dad was a real live assassin for our government here in the United States. And I did not know until he told me on his deathbed that that's what he had done when he would take those trips around the world. And he said, you would never have known it because he was a regular Little League dad in the neighborhood. Another one was a taxi driver in Louisville, Kentucky. I had flown in late about midnight, and I had a meeting the next day downtown, and this taxi driver, looking really gruff, had a heavy New York cup of coffee kind of accent. And I'm sort of an extrovert, so I like to talk to taxi drivers. I like to learn about them. So I said, so where are you from? New York. And I said, when'd you come to Louisville? And he said, after Nam. And I said, what'd you do in Nam? I was in the Phoenix Project. Well, that was Assassins because of the research I'd done. And I said, do you have to pick up anybody else tonight? And he said, no, you're my last one. And I said, if I cross your palm with $100 bill, can we go have a drink and you can tell me stories? Hell yeah. So we sat down, and this guy gave me a real sense of what it's like to be an assassin. Another one is a librarian at a seminary in the United States. And that's another whole story, but I got a lot of information from him. He's a little bit like my main character, who was a hitman, who became a minister. Now, the Israeli was running a tennis tournament in Texas. Our older son, who's a teaching tennis pro in DC, was playing in it when he was a young boy. And I got to talking to him, and I asked him, where are you from? He said, Israel. I said, oh, when did you move here? And he told me, and I said, so you had to serve in the military, because I knew everybody in Israel has to serve in military. I said, what part? He said, Mossad. I said, which unit? He said, the Kedan unit. And I knew that was Assassins. I said, okay, you got to tell me stories. And he told me that he had Arafat in his sights twice, and the order never came to take the shot. And then there was a Russian former mafia chief who's now a minister up in the Ural Mountains in Russia. And I had spoken there, and we got to talking. Really amazing character who had murdered a lot of people. But then he was converted, and now he's a minister up in the Ural Mountains in a church that's 3 stories below ground in a bomb shelter. And I got him to tell me stories. So I did all this research with these real live hitmen and the son of one to understand how to describe my character. And that really helped a lot. Again,
I would say this is very unusual research, wouldn't you, Rajetti?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my goodness, how fascinating and how exciting. And, it just sounds like a movie,
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
When there
are a lot of people, readers and people who've done reviews who have said this reads like it's on the screen. And let me tell you why that is the way it is. And that is, when I first wrote it, it was 740 pages. Wow. And I brought it into a literary agent in Dallas and dropped it on his desk. And he said, you nearly broke my desk with that thing. Go take 200 pages out and then I'll look at it. And that's when I began to learn what's very important as a writer. Great stories, whether they're screenplays, plays, whatever, novels, they're not written, they're rewritten. Charles Frazier rewrote Cold Mountain 20 times. I rewrote this 12 times, but who's counting if Charles Frazier rewrote it 20? And so I began writing and rewriting and tightening and getting people who were really good writers and editors to help me learn how to tighten the story. And then someone said, learn how to write screenplays. So I did. And I actually won the Telluride IndieFest screenwriting contest with a screenplay called Maggie's Perfect Match. And it's a totally different kind of story. It's a romantic comedy about a former, actually, it's about a woman who is a matchmaker of really high-powered personality who finds out she's dying of cancer and tries to match her husband with someone before she's gone, because women know who their husbands ought to marry, right? And so she does match him with her hospice nurse, not realizing that they were lovers in college. And then she's shoving him out on dates, and the whole town is gossiping about it. And the moment they fall deeply in love. She finds out she's going to live. And the whole end of the story is, now how do we unravel this dilemma? So I learned how to write screenplays, and then that helped me tighten this story in the novel. And so you won't have characters kill somebody and then call and say a lot. They simply will get on the phone and say, it's done. So my Bedouin terrorist does that at one point. So
I love it. That's absolutely amazing. And what great advice you have for anyone watching today, you know, at this time or on the replay, who want to be a better writer, and a writer like what you're writing. You have great advice. Will you tell us about the premise of the Assassin's manuscript?
Sure.
And it's just so exciting.
ex-CIA assassin becomes a minister I put him in Maryville, Tennessee, which is where we have retired. It's in East Tennessee. And there is actually a character in the novel who is a former classics professor at Maryville College. So I've got a little shout out to this college here in Maryville. And he gets pulled back to his old world of espionage and murder. But what happened earlier, and it's only handled in flashbacks because an editor suggested I do that, is that his last hit went awry because he was supposed to kill this Bedouin terrorist in New York City, and he had planted a bomb in the minivan, but instead the Bedouin's wife came down and was in the minivan. And a man is walking up one side of the street. It's West 114th Street and Upper West Side of Manhattan. And Adam, the main character's own wife, is walking down the other side of the street toward the minivan as he sees her. And the only reason she's there, I actually reveal in the novel, is that she had seen a note where he'd written that address, and she thought she'd come and surprise him. She was his new wife. Well, the van explodes, and it kills the Bedouin's girlfriend. It kills the main character's new wife, and it kills this man. In the intervening years, he's gone to seminary and become a minister, and he moves to Maryville, Tennessee, because the fiance, a Harvard-trained lawyer, the fiance of the man he killed by accident, is a member of a church where he becomes the pastor. And they begin to develop a relationship, to a great surprise for him, because he doesn't expect this. He just feels guilty about killing her fiance. And then she falls in love with him, and she travels around the Middle East and all the adventures. And all the way through, the reader is wondering, is she going to find out that he killed her fiance as she's falling in love with him? And if she does, what's she going to do? So there's an unlikely romance going. We've got the Russian mafia, we've got the Sicilian mafia, we have the Pope, a cardinal, a robbery of an old manuscript from the British Museum in London. I mean, it's just a lot of wild stuff. I have very short chapters because I'm easily bored when I'm reading a book, and I'll be reading at night. How long is this chapter? You know, how much more do I have to read? So short chapters. However, I have a hook at the end of each of them. So each one. So you have to keep going anyway. So that's a little longer answer. Sorry.
Oh my goodness, William, I could just hang on to your every word. We could talk for hours. I am absolutely loving all these amazing gems that you're sharing for authors. This is definitely one episode I'm going to tell everybody they have to watch, because, you know, you've just shared so many gems. Can we ask you, before we run out of time, to read us a section out of the book? Because I'd really just love for the audience to get a sense of what they can expect if they haven't picked up the book yet. So for anyone who hasn't picked up the book yet, if you are watching us over on Amazon, or if you're watching us anywhere else, the book is available on Amazon. And for my friends in South Africa, you can go and grab a copy of this book on Take A Lot. So it is available locally on Take A Lot. Go and grab a copy. This is a very, very compelling read. And so now let's take a listen to a little tidbit out of the book.
Yeah, it's on sale now in 37 countries around the world. So it's lots of places to get it. All right. I'm going to read you two little sections, and they're both about a subordinate character named Evelyn Hastings that many people think is their favorite character in the book. She gets kidnapped. She is the administrative assistant of my main character, Adam Hunter, and she gets kidnapped up into the mountains. So I'm just going to read a couple little parts of this. And then when the editor of the newspaper is coming to try to find her up in the Smoky Mountains, she has just escaped from her kidnapper, and she hates the woods, by the way. And so she's up there, and here it is. At the top of the meadow, Evelyn crouched like an animal on the edge of the woods, watching her kidnapper move in her direction. Her dress was drenched, her body soaked, her wrists reddened from the ropes she'd worked loose when she escaped. Wheezing like her old coffee pot, she wondered if she would ever catch her breath. When she saw him move to her left, away from her, she collapsed on a crunched bark next to a tall poplar. Scraping grime from her bottom, with her bare hand, she glanced up the incline into a matted tangle of undergrowth. She heard a sound and looked back. He had turned and started toward her again, moving like an animal on a hunt. He was the hunter and she the prey. He was only 50 yards away and closing fast. That's the end of one chapter. Now we move later to now she's up in the Smoky Mountains and is being held, been recaptured, and Frank Harkin is the editor of the Maryville Daily Times, and he's joined the posse trying to find her. Frank Harkin knew better than to get separated from the search party as they hiked up Mount LeConte on the Boulevard Trail, the razor-thin ridge that broke west from the Appalachian Trail. Old-timers called it a hogback. Starting at Newfound Gap, they'd made the turn after 3 miles and begun their assault on the ancient peak. A diaphanous veil hung low on the hills with a thin blue haze. A slanted radiance filled the hollows and plunging ravines. Heath balds and fields of goldenrod emerged in the fog, their sweet fragrance wafting Frank's direction. A knot of dead balsam trees stood guard along the trail like great gray ghosts. He heard the whir of wings as the search party ahead of him scared up a covey of slate pink juncos. He watched the group of birds bank left, then head south, drumming the air above him. When he was by himself in the mountains, his mind would often play tricks on him. Sometimes all he heard was the wind moaning in the trees. Sometimes it was the haunting melody of the veery, a small brown and cream-colored thrush whose song descended in a rolling series of flute-like notes dropping down the scale. But this time he was certain he'd heard a noise just the other side of a stand of spruce firs that lined the pathway. Maybe it was a wild hog foraging for food. He watched a peregrine falcon fire across the sky and wished he could move half that fast. He glanced up the knife-edge trail, no sign of the patrolman who'd preceded him. "Hey, fellas, I think I heard something down here." He waited for their response. Nothing.
Oh my gosh. Bergetti, I don't know about you, but William, you could just read all, I just didn't listen. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I visually can see every single thing that you're saying, and I feel myself leaning in, which I'm sure Bergetti does too. What's next? I mean, you do an amazing job reading it. Not everybody can read their own work and sound as compelling and fascinating and wanting the reader, the listener wanting more. So absolutely, you do that. Just did it now.
I agree with you 100%, Mary. That was absolutely phenomenal. What's next for you? I mean, this book is mind-blowing. What's next for you?
Well, people are wondering, are you going to write a sequel? And I have in mind a really wild sequel, but it took me 30 years to do this one. And I will be 75 in October. I don't think I have another 30. We'll see whether
you got to get on it. Get on it.
Yeah, get on it. We'll see if I come up with another idea out of these characters. But I've just finished doing 3 lectures at Maryville College on the brain. These are the first one is a lecture I've done at medical schools and medical conferences all over the country and even around the world at the China Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. I've done it at Cornell, Carnegie Mellon, lots of places. And I have 2 other lectures that are similar. They're all on the brain in one way or another. I'm thinking about doing a book this would be nonfiction. I have a fiction idea of it as well that would marry faith in the brain. The title of these lectures was The Good News of Neuroscience, Faith in the Brain for a Better You and a Better World. And I've got some ideas that are more holistic. The Greek word for salvation is soteria, which means all of your being. The Hebrew word for soul, nephesh, means all of who you are, not this separate spiritual thing. So that when you feel real soteria, experience real salvation, you feel it in your whole body and your mind, your spirit. And it's also for the whole community, for all creation. So it's a really huge word. It's not little me and Jesus word. It's enormous. And I think that healthcare providers and clergy are sort of co-participants in helping God, however you view God. I'm part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, obviously. We are helping each other with helping God bring soteria to the world. And so, I think a book that kind of relates to those kinds of things.
Love it.
Sounds intellectual.
No, I think it's great.
But I use a lot of humor and inspiration when I talk. These lectures will be online at Maryville College soon on their website, and anybody could watch them from anywhere around the world.
That is phenomenal. Thank you so much. I'm really sad that we're out of time because we could talk for another 30 minutes at least. William, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing so much of your journey as an author and, empowering new aspiring authors in the process. That was just absolutely priceless. So thank you for that. To our amazing viewers, wherever you've watched us, if you're going to be catching this on the replay, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. Leave us a comment if you can. We'd love to know where you are watching us from. And if you have any questions for William, please feel free to leave those in the comments and we'll catch them later. And so with that, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you. William, a huge, big thank you from us. And we'd love to invite you back again onto the Writer's Corner live show. So with that, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week on another episode of the Writer's Corner live show.